Saxony. I'm the head of McLean School. It's wonderful to see you all here. Many of you are members of the McLean community, but I see some faces who are not familiar. It's really wonderful to have you all here for such an important topic, really one that transcends so much of what we do as educators, the topic of stress and motivation. And the brain, of course, and also to have two wonderful speakers. So I'm going to ask our Director of Student Community Wellness, Frankie Engelking, to introduce our speakers. And I'm really pleased to have them here.
As Mike said, my name is Frankie Engelking. I'm the Director of Student and Community Wellness here at McLean. I'd like to welcome you tonight to our second evening of a three-evening series in community education. Tonight we are very proud and honored to have our guest speakers who are both renowned educators and work with families throughout the United States and internationally. Dr. Bill Stixrud is a nationally renowned neuropsychologist who has been working in the field of adolescent growth and development with children, families, and adolescents for over 30 years. Mr. Johnson, Ned Johnson, is the founder and president of Prep Matters, which is located in Bethesda, Maryland. Mr. Johnson oversees instruction, training, curriculum, development, business management, and has been working with Dr. Stixrud for over 10 years. Mr. Johnson also asked me to be sure I mentioned from his business card that he is also a tutor geek, for which he is very proud. Both Dr. Stixrud and Mr. Johnson are here tonight to share with us their most recent research that they've been doing, and they're pulling that together in a book that they're writing called Sense of Control. So we're very lucky to be the first audience to hear some of the research that they have found that they're going to be using in their book. So thank you both very much for coming here tonight. We appreciate it.
I guess we should start by thanking you all for being so brave to come out on a wicked snow day like we had today. Real fortitude, which is great. So just, how many folks here have kids who are in high school? Middle school? How many kids have kids who are already into college? Or, great, it's all over the place.
How about elementary?
Elementary. Sounds like a lot of busy parents is what it sounds like. So I just want to take a moment, Bill and I want to sort of share a little bit kind of how we came at this idea of the sense of control. I am, as Frankie said, a tutor geek. I've spent 20 plus years helping people through terrible things like SATs and ACTs, and so I'm really held accountable for people's performance academically on standardized tests. And had really good instruction early on and understood the tests well. But in doing this over and over and over, because the tests don't change very much, I started to see lots of kids who didn't perform their potential and was left scratching my head a lot trying to figure out what was going on. And so I look and think and poke and prod, and also started exploring the expertise of people like Bill, experts in stereotype threat, experts in sleep deprivation, performance, anxiety. And, oh, I should speak louder, thank you. And so what we found in doing this, is, at least in my work, is that a lot of the things that really matter. Thank you, Bill. Is this work? Yeah.
It's on.
Feels very. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, so I'll back that up a little bit. So in my work with helping kids be successful on things like standardized tests, I came to realize that a lot of the things that I initially thought were really ancillary were actually things that proved to be quite pivotal, like sleep deprivation and their anxiety and how they framed their own self-concept. And Bill and I had a mutual friend who's a very well-regarded college counselor, and so we found we had mutual clients. And we started getting together and talking about the things that we felt really mattered. And all of these things collectively kind of fell under the rubric of a sense of control. Things that fostered in kids a sense of their own control, of being well rested, of things they should be in charge of, and things really that it was a mistake for them to think about being responsible for. Things that would develop their prefrontal cortexes so they'd have more control of kind of how their brains work. Things that try to lower their anxiety, meditation, all sorts of different issues. And this has really become the genesis of our book, it turns out that in anything from Carol Dweck to people who are experts on motivation, that the idea of a sense of control really ends up being pivotal in every dominant model that you can find of motivation, of low anxiety, and of peak performance. And so one of the things we'd like to do tonight is sort of talk about, again, how we've come to this and kind of the science behind it, and also how folks can apply this kind of in their day in, day out lives.
We're both kind of test guys. You know, Dad is just a genius at inspiring kids and teaching them how to maximize their potential. And Have been testing kids myself for the last 30 years, and it's just so much fun. I was testing this kid with autism a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him to tell me these stories, look at these pictures and tell stories. I wanted to see whether you could make social sense out of the pictures and stuff. And so he tells me these stories, and they're really not bad. He says, "Can I tell you one of my stories?" I said, "Sure." He says, "So a man walks into a bar." It went downhill from there, but it was off to a great start. So, you know, I think that I started thinking about this idea of how important a sense of control is when I started working as a psychologist, and I see so many kids who hate homework and have a ton of trouble with homework. And I literally, a few years ago, there's a 1 week where 3 days in a row I saw moms who said, you know, homework is like World War III in our home, and stuff like that. And there are 3 war metaphors that the 3 different mothers used. And back in 1986, I wrote a couple papers on homework, and I actually studied the research on it. And I was dumbfounded to learn that after, at that time, 60 years of research, nobody had been able to demonstrate that homework correlates with learning in elementary school, and very minimal correlations after that. And it started seeming to be pretty crazy for parents to be butting heads all night about something if there's no relation to learning. And so I wrote this article for an educational magazine that got reprinted in McCall's and newspapers around the world. And I simply just said, just tell your kid, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And to think about yourself as a consultant with Dad. Say, I'm willing to sit down and help you for an hour every night, or I'm willing to get somebody else to help you, but I'm not willing to fight with you and act like it's my job to make you do your homework. Because it couldn't be my job, because all you'd have to do is close your eyes or put your head down or slump to the floor. Well, I couldn't make you do it. And if I act like it's my job to try to make you do it, I'm going to weaken you, because you're going to think that somebody other than you is ultimately responsible for it. And around the same time, I started to think, well, you really can't make. I did my internship at the Children's Hospital in Boston. Where Barry, some of you know Barry Brazelton. He was a world famous pediatrician at Harvard Medical School. And I realized that Brazelton or Hulk Hogan can't make an infant do anything. I mean, you really can't make somebody do something against their will. This is really kind of pivotal insight for me. Around the same time, I'm working. One of my best friends is a therapist who did training, and one of the instructions that the therapist got was, don't work harder to help your clients solve the problems than they work to solve them themselves, because they're going to then just depend on you. And if it starts to feel to you that you're working harder to try to solve their problems, you got to say, something's wrong with this picture, because I'm working harder to solve this than you are. And because I see so many kids who are underachievers, I see kids who have, where the adults in their lives are spending 90 units of energy or 99 units of energy trying to solve their academic problems, and the kids begrudgingly expending 1, that something's wrong with this picture. And I started to think that all the things that I know that are valuable for helping kids, they come down to really helping increasing a kid's sense of control and increasing parents' sense of control, in part by encouraging parents not to try to control things that you really can't control. And so we're going to go through some of this more specifically, but for me, it was some of these experiences of just the futility of trying to make kids do stuff where it's not possible to do it. And see all these kids I see all these adolescents who've used years. They use their all this tremendous adolescent energy resisting people's attempts to try to get them what's in their own best interest, get them to do what's in their own best interest. And so I think that when Ned and I with Kathleen O'Connor, who introduced us, a great educational consultant, told me about this young guy who's going to take over the world in a good way. It said he's a very powerful, inspirational, motivational guy. And we shared this interest in helping kids be motivated and helping kids not live with ungodly levels of stress. And so we've been teaming up here to talk about this stuff. And maybe a year and a half ago, we were trying to figure out what's really the core of what we're trying to do here. And we really kept coming back to this idea of a sense of control. In part because so much of our work is trying to help kids deal with the stress of modern life. And the most stressful thing in the world for people is a low sense of control. And in part because what Ned just mentioned is that every successful theory of motivation emphasizes the importance of a sense of autonomy or a sense of control. And for us, I mean, so much of what we're trying to do is to help kids develop their own motivation and not be stressed out of their minds all the time. We felt this is a really cool idea. And in the year and a half that we've been talking about this, I find myself thinking about this all the time and applying it in almost all the problem situations. I think about it. How do I increase parents' sense of control and kids' sense of control? Good stuff happens.
You want to talk about brain switches, or?
Oh, well, yeah, I'll say a couple things about it. I was testing this other girl this summer who has autism, and she looks behind it. She looks behind my desk, and she sees this picture of me in a tuxedo and my daughter in a wedding dress. She's an 8-year-old, really smart kid with autism. She says, "You got married?" I said, "Yeah, I did 37 years ago." I said, "That's my daughter." I said, "You married your daughter?" So we aren't going to talk too much about the brain. Really, I think here's the most useful stuff. I mean, the most useful stuff I've ever learned about the brain is the prefrontal cortex, the purple part in the front of your head, right behind your forehead, is the executive control part of your brain. And when you're in your right mind, your prefrontal cortex is really mediating the rest of your activity. I mean, that when you're stressed, what happens is your amygdala, this part of this primitive, basically threat detector in your limbic system, is when it senses threat and it starts your fight or flight response, your amygdala is running the rest of your brain. And I'll tell you that if you're in an emergency, if you're being threatened, if you're in really something that responds, an instinctive fight or flight response, you want your amygdala to be in charge. But for most of the time, you don't want your amygdala to be in charge. You want to be able to handle things thoughtfully and flexibly, which requires the frontal cortex to be online. And stress doesn't allow that. So, from my point of view, this is the most useful stuff that I know about the brain, and also the fact that this prefrontal cortex is not fully mature until the cognitive functions until about. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Barely. Yeah, but this prefrontal cortex, the cognitive functions not fully mature until 25 plus minus 3. And if you're male, probably plus 3. You got ADHD in male, probably plus 5. So very good. And the emotional regulation piece until 32 plus minus 3. So that's the most useful stuff I've learned. I'll see you back here.
I had a client I was working with last year, a boy who was really struggled with self-regulation, and I think not even close to fully developed prefrontal cortex, and Dad was having a really hard time with this, and I kept sort of counseling that his brain doesn't work yet the way yours does, and it's going to take him some time. And he could understand that at an intellectual level, but he was having a really hard time with this, and finally got this email after a particularly troubling week of underperformance, and he emails me, "Are you sure he has a prefrontal cortex?"
Excellent question.
Can't actually verify, but I think so. Had another client who terrific boy. And he said to his mom, he said, "Mom, you can tell this to me over and over and over. But no matter what you say, I am not going to have the brain of a middle-aged woman." So you may want to change your expectations there a little bit. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, this whole idea of the prefrontal cortex going offline is something I, at this point, talk endlessly to my kids about. Because if I had, $10 for every parent who says, "I don't understand, we did all this test prep, she did all, where did these scores come from? Because we expected here, how did they end up there?" And I think that people have the idea that cognition is like a light switch. You should just be able to turn it on and have it there when you want it. And I was 23 at the time. I just started doing test prep, and I didn't know anything, but I think I know now. And I got a really unhappy email from a parent, blah, 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 I don't understand what could have happened, and we spent all this time and effort and money, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm as befuddled as you are. And so I met with the girl and asked her, "So tell me about your SAT. What went on that day?" Well, a couple things that might affect performance a little bit. One, on the way to the test, she got in a full-on knockdown, drag-out fight with her mom, which is probably not what I'd advise you to do the morning of your SAT. And then two, when she went to the test center, she saw some folks that she knew, including the week previous, she had broken up with her boyfriend of 3 months, and that was traumatic. And then sort of on a rebound on Saturday night, she went out and found another young man with whom to be amorous, I guess as you might say it. And then when she went to the test, she saw both these folks in her room with her. So her thinking was probably not fully focused on analogies at that point. So let's see here. Talk about this. So this is a little bit based on a talk I gave at Murray about kind of what causes people to be stressed, what causes, in this case, teens to be stressed. And it's kind of endless. Right? I mean, if you have the idea, if one of your kids is really sick, really sick, like 104 fever, how hard is it to go to work and really focus on what's there? It's really hard to do. And for kids, just the idea that their best friend is mad at them, or that what's your girlfriend or boyfriend doing, that's enough to really get stuck in their head. And adolescence is a little complicated. And as Bill points out, a lot of these things really center around, are these things that I can control, that I should control? In a lot of cases, these are things that kids can't control. They talk about cognitive load, how many things can a brain process at once. So Sonia Lupian is this researcher at Montreal, and she has this fabulous model of things that stress people out. And it's the acronym NUTS, what makes people nuts. And pretty much everything that you can think of will fall under one of these four things of novelty, right? For my student, I think probably showing up and having 2 current or past boyfriends in the room, probably, I hope, a new situation for her. Probably a little unpredictable. Threat, either physical threat or threat to ego. I mean, you guys, of course, read a bit about the whole fight or flight mechanism. Our brains are really designed to protect us from, the saber-toothed tiger jumping out of the woods. We don't have that anymore. But our amygdala is really designed to respond to any threat the same way as though it were a physical threat. And so it doesn't do things in small measure. It tends to go really big all at once. And then the idea of a sense of control and not feeling that one has a sense of control is as Bill pointed out, deeply, deeply anxiety creating. So this is a performance curve called the Yerkes-Dodson law, and I find it a really helpful one. If I can walk over here for a moment. You can see across the bottom, it's arousal level, which you can basically just think of as stress. It's cortisol, which is a stress chemical, and you can measure people's spit. And then across on the y-axis, if you haven't done math in a while, is performance. So when the stress level is low, when the arousal level is really low, so is your performance, right? The first day of a snow day, sweetheart, you start your term paper? Vampire Diaries, Mom, I'll get to that later, right? No one's really thinking or performing at a particularly high level when the stress level is really low. If you're clinically depressed, it doesn't matter. You put a gun to my head, whatever. I'm not doing it. But as the arousal level increases, so does performance, right? For people who played sports, right? You've played against teams that are horrible, right? I play tennis really badly, right? So if you really wanted to play your best game of tennis, you wouldn't want to play against me because I'm not good enough to make you play your best. And so we know that we need a certain measure of arousal, a certain measure of stress, kind of use stress, right, to be peak performance. Actually, do you know that stress didn't exist until 1936? Do you know that? Hans Selye coined the term, and I think it was 36, maybe 39, Bill can get me on that. The problem is, as the arousal level gets higher, performance starts to fall apart, right? So if I took a typical student and said, I'll give you $100 if you get this math problem right, for most kids, that's enough for them to really pay attention. If, however, I said, you know what, let's turn this up a little bit. If you get it right, I'll give you $10,000. But just to make it fun, let's do it on national television. Right, that TV show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Put me under enough stress, put any of us under enough stress, and it's very possible that now we're not. And so the problem with this performance curve is that it's different for every person. So the amount of stress that I can tolerate to be in a peak performance may be a whole lot less than what you can tolerate, or it may be more. And it's also different, not only for different people, it's different for the same person in different situations. And there are lots of reasons for this, but a kid may perform at a really high level and a tremendous amount of stress academically, but really fall apart socially, public speaking, athletically. On average, this I find helpful, on average this curve is more to the left for girls and women, and more to the right for boys and men. So I'll give you an example. I tutored last year a whole bunch of kids. This one school, they all had a term paper due in the spring. So on Friday, I had these 3 girls, all terrifically academic, and I'd been hearing about the term paper for weeks. And I said, so how's the term paper going? So, oh, it's great, yeah, it's great. I've just got to finish doing the edits. No, I still have the brain of an adolescent boy. Got to throw that out there. And so my brain, this does not compute. I mean, the thing is due on Monday. You're just doing the final edits now, like, really? And the next girl comes in, so I've just got to do the footnotes and I'll be good. And I'm just looking at them like they're from a different species altogether. Now, on Saturday afternoon, the boys roll in. So, yeah, term paper due Monday, right? How's it going? Yeah, no, yeah, it's, yeah. That's me, I've been there, right? And on Saturday afternoon, we sort of really get engaged. But so with this, so it's important, and I see this, and I have a 13-year-old, my son turns 13 on Friday, and his curve is like way out there, right? I mean, I perform best under stress, he only performs under stress. My wife, incredibly bright, incredibly organized, her curve is more this way. And so the challenge that I think a lot of parents have with fully developed prefrontal cortex is, right, a little bit of stress they know is coming, and their kids aren't going to engage until it's way over there. And so my wife basically loses it, like a few hours before my son is just about to engage. That creates a little bit of a problem. Did anyone see this article? This in the Times a couple years ago, called "Worriers versus Warriors," and it had to do with a specific gene called the COMT gene that deals with basically processing or clearing dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical, performance chemical, from the brain. And so it asked the question, why do some kids perform really well under pressure and other kids kind of fall apart? And so it's basically the idea that some people, a little bit of dopamine is enough for them to really engage. And so I'll go back to my girls and say, okay, I'll get, the term paper's coming up, I'm ready to jump on it, even though it's not due for 3 weeks. But those kids, those quote-unquote worriers, if their brains get flooded, it's like an engine that's flooded, and they don't perform that well under pressure. The warriors, of course, are kind of like lions who sleep like 17 hours a day, and every once in a while they run out and kill something, and they go back and eat, and they go back to sleeping. The important thing if you have a kid who's more a worrier, the solution to it in many ways is just more practice. Okay? Like with standardized tests, we're just trying to desensitize kids to that and give them more experience doing this. Like public speaking, that most people are more afraid of dying than they are public speaking. Yes, yes. The first time I had a public thing, I was interviewed on television, and it was the nicest woman in the world, and she asked me these total softball questions, and my first answer came out something like, and I couldn't, and it was unbelievable how stressful that was and how unbelievably inarticulate I was. And the problem was I just hadn't practiced enough. So if you have a kid who's more a worrier, you can count on that student to really engage more, eat more early, but probably needs more practice to deal with this upcoming stressor. for a kid who's more of a warrior, you be careful that you don't start, as Bill pointed earlier, don't start pushing them and trying to control them now, because you can kind of make them do it now, but you can't make them want to do it now. And that's ultimately you want them to want to do the work that's theirs.
I'll just mention a couple of things. So, really, one of the two major things that got us to think about the sense of control is this idea that there's nothing more stressful in life. That when there's something's going on and it's painful, and you feel helpless, you feel overwhelmed. And I don't know that I've ever felt more panicked in my whole life than my daughter, who's now 32. When she was 2, she was pretty verbally precocious, but she started stuttering just terribly. And she went through a little phase where she wouldn't talk. And she just didn't want to talk. It was just so hard. And I've never been more panicked in my life, because if she's not going to talk, how could I possibly know? And I think that if we think about the things in our life that are really stressful, it's usually because it's something that we can't control. And if you got a rat, I started thinking about this because I read years ago that you can shock rats, and you ring a bell before you're going to get shocked, and they know they're going to get shocked, and their stress hormones go through the roof. And if you put a little wood bar in their cage, so you ring the bell, and they can go over and chew on the bar, their stress levels don't go up nearly as high. And Ned has, maybe I'll tell this story of somebody at a prison camp who was being tortured and actually put a wood chip in his mouth and would chew on the wood chip to basically have sense of control to deal with torture. And this idea of so much of what we do, so much of what psychotherapy does, so it helps reduce stress by helping people think about another way of looking at a problem. What could you do? How could you think differently? How could you act differently? That increases the sense of control. And so from a learning point of view, I've been studying the research on brain functioning as it applies to education for about 40 years. And by far, the most commonly drawn implication from brain research to education is that kids need to feel safe in school in order to learn, because if they don't feel safe, what happens is that, as Britta is saying, is this prefrontal cortex. Is it Lupian? No, Amy Arnsten calls the prefrontal cortex the Goldilocks of the brain, because you need this very nice balance of dopamine and norepinephrine, the neurotransmitters that run it. And stress will so easily disrupt that balance of neurotransmitters. And so from a learning point of view, stressed kids can't learn. And part of my with kids and self-control is I want to teach kids it's a complete waste of time to try to study and try to learn if you're tired or you're too stressed. But I ask teachers, tell kids it's a waste of your time. When I give you an assignment, here's what I think how it will benefit you. Here's what I think will happen in your brain if you do it. But if you're tired and you're stressed, it's not going to help you. Don't bother. Do something else. Something else that might help you. But I think I want kids to understand how they work, how life works. And we know very well that kids can't learn and they can't think very clearly. They can't remember what they learned if they're tired or they're stressed. And from a mental health point of view, we see all kinds of, my practice, we just see there's a lot of nervous kids in this world, and a lot of nervous parents, and we live in a very stressed society, and all the disorders that I see, all the anxiety disorders, depression, that stuff, these are all stress-related problems. I went down also this summer to get this little girl who's 6, who is just extremely anxious. And one of my colleagues is working with her. I was supposed to see her for an hour, so I go down to get her. And as soon as I walk in the room, she turns away, and she's really anxious. I have my little dog. She says, come down with me and snuggle to my office. So she walks down, and I hear her mutter under her breath, "This is going from bad to worse." So the thing about, there's a gal at San Diego State by the name of Jean Twenge, who she's compared mental health problems, or symptoms of mental health problems, contemporary kids and kids going back to the 1930s. And she's basically, there's an instrument called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. Some of you have taken it, your kids have taken it. It's 500 questions. I like electronics magazines, yes or no, and it goes on from there. And the idea is that this was developed in the 30s. And so we have people's responses. Adolescents and young, well, adolescents started in the 50s, but we have young adults, college students, responses from 1930. And what Twenge found was that kids like in 1906 or 2006 or 2007 were 5 to 8 times more likely to have the symptoms of anxiety disorder or mood disorder, depression, now than they were at the height of the Great Depression during World War II, or during Vietnam, during the Cold War. And so we live in a very anxious and reactive society, and all these things are disorders of stress regulation. And the interesting thing, Twenge also, and some of you have heard of this notion of locus of control. So internal locus control is that what I do matters. I have the ability to act in a way that will influence my life situation. External locus of control is, well, I screwed up as my teacher. I'm an idiot for a teacher. That kind of thing. The causation is external. So Twenge, she compared this increase in anxiety and depression with what she saw is this increase in an external locus of control. So over this period since from the 1950s, young people's locus of control has become increasingly external. Supporting this idea that a low sense of control is stressful and associated with stress-related problems like mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and we know that certainly that sleep is a big deal from a mental health point of view. Stress makes it hard to sleep. It makes you want to sleep all day, and it's a chronic stressor. And sorry,
I got it.
oh yeah,
I'm just pointing me. Tell me what to do.
he's about the nicest person I've ever met in my entire life. But and it turns out that affluent kids from affluent parents, are at higher risk for a lot of mental health issues than even poor kids are. And I think that in part because affluent kids oftentimes live in cultures that they're highly competitive and highly pressured. And in part because affluent parents are oftentimes don't spend as much time with their kids as poor parents do. And so I think that because, I think, so the summary of this first part of what we're saying is the fact that a low sense of control is the most stressful things for kids, for parents, their teachers, their administrators. This is a big deal because stress-related problems are a huge problem. I forgot. This Jean Twenge has also, with this increased external locus of control, has also come what she calls an epidemic of narcissism.
This is no, it's good.
I'm done with all the good news there.
Okay. So I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter, and we live about a block and a half from the school that my kids attend. Now, when they used to have to take a bus to go someplace else, this was kind of a problem because if they were late, their being late became my problem. Now, if my kid is late, it's not my problem. It's fantastic. So, not my problem. He has to report to the principal. And yet still, we found ourselves, my wife and I, constantly, it's basically playing his alarm clock, you know, time to get up, dude, you only got 20 minutes, you only got 15 minutes, we gotta keep going, we gotta keep going, we gotta keep going. And it was exhausting doing this every single day. And I finally came to him and I said, Matthew, so let's have a talk, because I'm feeling a little frustrated that I'm spending all my, over and over and over asking. I said, do you want me to get you up or not? You can get your alarm clock, I'm happy to help, or I can leave you alone. What would you like? And he said, well, honestly, Dad, I'm glad you asked. Because once or twice is great. But after that, the more you and Mom tell me to do something, the less I want to do it. That was one of the most illuminating conversations I've ever had in my life. My son is breathtakingly candid, which is fantastic. And so a couple days later, I went, I woke him up, it was whatever time it was, 7 o'clock, and I came back around, and he's still there lying in bed, and I was about to say something really sharp, because I was just annoyed. And so I bit my tongue. You oversleep, and if you miss school, it's a problem, pal. So I go downstairs, and I'm sitting there reading the paper angrily, and like 3 minutes later, he comes traipsing downstairs. Hi, Dad! And I'm stunned, because this is like 20 minutes earlier than he normally gets down there. And he can see the incredulity across my face. And he says, well, I told you it would work better when I'm in charge. No, I'm still waiting for him to get to tension, but that's a different issue. There's a little bit of that. This was I have a kid I'm working with who is just this incredible kid. And she had the, I don't know whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage. So mom went to Harvard and dad went to Yale. Those are high expectations. And she had this amazing comment. We did a bunch of work. It's just this, again, a ridiculously great child. And she said that, my parents always trusted me to do my own work. And then something snapped in junior year. And now they're all over me all the time about all the work that I'm doing. And this is an A student, and she says, it feels like they've taken something away from me. So there's, Edward Deci and Richard Ryan have a model called self-determination theory. If you've read Dan Pink's book, Drive, it's basically the same idea. And so it's competency, relatedness, and autonomy. It's a very simple, very elegant model that to be internally motivated, these are the 3 things that we need to have. So competency, it's really hard for me to be excited about playing tennis as badly as I play. If I were solid, even if I'm the worst, but I'm solid, I'm going to feel more motivated to do it. Relatedness, this is one of the things that I think is so important. I have a lot of parents who will have concerns about their kids, have things they're trying to get the kids to do, and I say, please tell me, let me do that, okay? Because I can, snipe at them about studying their vocabulary or whatever. I said, you be mom, right? Because any fool can teach vocabulary, right? But you do not want to outsource parental love, right? That's something only moms and dads can do, right? We don't want to send that away. And by and large, people aren't excited to do, and they're not motivated to do something if they don't feel like they belong. If they lose that sense of connection, it's really, really hard to be motivated. And then, if you can read this, New Yorker, we've been thinking a lot about what we want to do with your life. Which is probably true for a lot of us, but we want to be careful about that. Not having a sense of autonomy is really, really, really demotivating. And it's funny to think about how much I, even as much as I do this work, I feel myself wanting to be on top of my kids. And I thought, man, if I went to work and every 10 minutes my boss is checking, do you have that done yet? Johnson, need more help with that? Right? It's got to be done at 4. Right? We go out of our minds, right? But somehow that's supposed to be okay with kids. So nicely balanced. And this is what I fear happens, at least what it feels like to kids, when we push. Oftentimes on the competency, right? There's a fear. Now, we want our kids to be happy and be successful. I mean, that's why we're all here having this conversation. But I think that there's a tendency to think, well, if you're not on the travel soccer team in 2nd grade, you're never going to get a college scholarship, right? Or which math group you're in. And we want to push so much on the skills. And again, from my perspective, that's what schools are for, right? And that's what a mentor, a tutor, a coach can be. And if you feel yourself, if you feel that relatedness, slipping away, you may just want to rebalance your portfolio a little bit. Everybody know Carol Dweck? Do people know Carol Dweck? Really quickly, great research. If you haven't seen her stuff yet, she has a book called Mindset. And it's a very simple idea, the idea of a growth versus a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is simply the idea that my abilities are things that I was born with. And the growth mindset is I develop the ability, whether it's math or tennis or whatever it happens to be. The challenge is that kids can, from all sorts of angles, get the idea that their abilities are God-given, they're genetic. You're so smart. I don't like that word. You're so curious. Okay? Curious is something I can control. Smart, if I don't get an A, if I have been an A all the way through and now I get a B, have I reached the end of my smartness? It's a really scary place for kids. And the book goes on and on and on about all the effects of this. She had this really elegant little experiment where she gave kids basically a part of a 5th grade IQ test, the visual spatial puzzles, and broke the group up into two halves. To one group said, wow, you guys did great on this. You must be really smart at puzzles. Well, thank you very much. That feels so good, right? And this group said, wow, you guys did great on those. You must have worked really hard on it. Basically fostered a fixed mindset. You're just naturally brilliant. Yay, you. You people, well, you worked really hard and that's how you got there. And the impact on this was really profound. Principally, these people had no interest then in doing anything that was challenging. Would you like to try it? We found the 6th grade one. We broke into the closet. Do you want to try the 6th grade puzzles? No, we're good. We'll just stick with a random mindless activity because we don't want to lose our label. These folks, as told you worked really hard at it, said, sure, what the heck, I'd be fun to see if I can do the 6th grade one. They had another part to this where they had everybody write a letter to some they thought would be delivered to another school to describe what the experience was like. And if you wished to, you could write your score at the bottom of it. Now, this was basically anonymous and it never went anywhere. And all these people who were told that they were so smart, they lied about their scores. Not down, in case you're curious about that. They all inflated them because they were so worried did these other kids someplace far off believe that they were smart. They then recreated the whole thing, and a month later came back and gave people another version of the 5th grade IQ test. And what happened is these people actually did worse than they had the first time. Because with the fear, right, the prefrontal cortex offline, and they're worried about losing that label. These people were told they just worked so hard and that's why they did about 40% better simply because they believed it was tied to their effort, not to something genetic. And therefore something they can control. So this is very similar to internal versus external locus of control. So the more we can, as parents, put in our kids' hands the idea that they can control things. Actually, I should read this really. I pulled this up, and I wasn't trying to be rude, but my wife again she's actually an educator. She's an incredible person, but she's from a family where her mom was very controlling of her and her sisters. When my wife, she's very academic, went to college, one of those highly selective places, blah blah blah. While there, on the way there, my wife's mother said to her, I'm really worried for you in college. I don't know how you're going to make it without me. Okay. Now, my mother-in-law is a great person, and she loves her daughters to the bottom of her heart. But really what this was, it was just her anxiety. This is my oldest, this is my baby, she's going out in the real world. How is she going to do this? I've been there to hold her hand all the way along the line, maybe type up too many papers, right? And that is an incredibly disabling message, and we don't want to give that to kids. So I've been pushing with my delightful, overly articulate son. Let me read this. This is great. So this was just this weekend. And I got this from both. I got the same basic version from my wife and my son, so I feel it's pretty accurate. And I read it by both of them, so I have waivers for this. So my son's version, my wife, what is it going to take you to wake up and get your homework done in a timely fashion? My son, well, you've told me that 511 times. What makes you think the 512th will make a difference? My wife, it's true, but, my son, I'm thinking, she's doing it again. She can't stop herself. She's trying to defend herself. So I say, well, Mom, you're not going to like this, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So essentially, this conversation is insane. Oh, man. My wife, it's a good point. I'm sorry, I just can't seem to stop myself. It drives me crazy to watch you struggle and constantly fail to manage your time well. She loves her little boy. And my son says, well, technically, it's my life, and so it shouldn't bother you if I fail. But biologically, I guess that's what moms do. You know? And I mean, she's a great mom, but she really does she wants to help, which ends up meaning she wants to control things, right? Because, again, she has a fully developed prefrontal cortex, and my son, we think he has one. So among other things, I yelled at him. I said, can we stop doing our homework in the kitchen? Because he's a dreamy little boy, and when you sit there and go, for like the next 17 minutes, what do you think your mom's gonna do? Go space out on your bedroom. Then it's not her problem at all. It's your problem. I don't know where that is. He's a lovely kid.
So what struck Ned and I was about this sense of control. Is that not only is a low sense of control the most stressful thing in the universe, and virtually everything that reduces stress increases your sense of control, but also for kids to be self-motivated, that they have to have a sense of autonomy. And the three most useful approaches to motivation that I know about are the self-determination theory. It says autonomy is really it's the biggest deal for developing motivation, because you have to, how to motivate yourself if you don't feel like I'm free to act. It's that sense of autonomy, and also the Dweck work, as you mentioned, which focuses on that if you work hard, that increases that sense of control. That I can work hard, I can develop even my IQ, I can develop through hard work. And one of the most useful things I ever learned, this guy studied how do kids become self-motivated adolescents and young adults. He said it's not through dutifully doing their homework every night, it's through the passionate pursuit of their pastimes. It's passionate pursuit of stuff they love to do. Because when they're putting together models, or they're engaged in playing music or sports or dance, probably video games too, they're practicing, they're developing a brain state that's highly focused, that's used to working in a very focused, determined, effortful manner, but it's not stressful. And I think that's the kind of brain state we want. Certainly in our careers, we want to be able to work hard and be very focused and determined, but not have to be unduly stressful. And again, it's that how do you promote it through supporting kids for the most part, what they love to do. And I'll just say that what's next is sorry. So let's talk about what the kind of stuff that we think is most useful to the parents to know from this point of view. And the first thing is that we think it's really important for kids to make decisions. And certainly for teenagers, I think the most important thing we can say to teenagers is that I have confidence in your ability to make decisions about your own life. And I want you to practice making decisions about important stuff in your own life. Because I don't want to send you off to college or send you off someplace until you've had years of experience paying attention to yourself and what's important to me, what do I really want. And I think that with young kids, we start by giving them choices. We start by saying, you're the expert on you. Really, nobody knows you better than you know yourself. And in terms of, I used to do this because my wife is a wonderful Jewish mother, and my son, she'd encourage him to kind of eat more. And I take him aside and say, Ellie, you're the expert on you. You're the only one who really knows when you're hungry or not. You should stop eating when you're full and eat again when you're hungry. And I think that this message, even with little kids, that you want to do it this way or this way. What do you think is the best way to do this? What's important to you? You know, there's this woman who, a husband and wife team who wrote a book back in the 80s called How to Deal with Your Acting Up Teenager. And it's based on this premise that you can't control teenagers. You really can't make them do stuff. If they want to, if you try to fight them, they'll beat you. And I called her, and one of the women who's like, she's probably 75 or 80, older than I am. And I called her at one point. I said, well, does this approach where you don't try to force your kids, you don't try to monitor them constantly, and does this apply to kids with ADHD? Because a lot of parents say, well, I have to be on my kid all the time because he won't do anything. And she says, well, Bill, it's just, for us, it's just a matter of treating people respectfully. And I have found it so useful to start with the assumption that even pretty young kids have a brain in their head and want their life to work. And so the first thing that I recommend is that in terms of developing this sense of control is with little kids, encourage them to make decisions, make choices, giving them choices. They don't have a whole universe of choices. And when you feel yourself trying to force, you can say to them, something's wrong with this picture because I feel like I'm trying to make you do something. I used to tell my kid when he was 4 years old, I'd say, if you fight me on something, and I'd say, look, you're acting like I think I can make you do this. I couldn't make you do this. And I'd prescribe him half a dozen ways he could beat me if I tried to make him do it. And I tell you, you have to kind of think, what do I do next? You know? But it's very empowering to give up the idea that somehow you're supposed to be able to control your kids. You're supposed to be able to, that somehow it's your job to make sure that they always behave well, always do their homework, and turn their homework in on time. And kids need practice, looking at themselves honestly, trusting their own intuition. They need encouragement to figure out what they really want and what's important to them. And they need practice figuring out how to repair situations to make a bad decision. And part of the way I got here is that when I first started working as a neuropsychologist in the early 80s, it was much more common than it is now for kids to repeat a grade in public schools. So I very commonly see these kids who are 19 years old, and I'd say, so what year are you in school? And they say, well, I'm a sophomore in college, but I should be a junior, but my parents made me repeat first grade or kindergarten. And still, it's just unresolved anger about having been forced to repeat a grade. So this may sound crazy, but I started to say to parents, tell your kid, even a first grader, I said, tell him nobody's going to make you repeat first grade. However, I want to talk through the pros and cons of repeating, and then it's going to be your call. And you say, so the pros are that it'll give you an initial year of maturation, you'll have a more mature brain, you'll have this nice teacher again who really likes you. And the cons is you might get your kids saying, oh, you flunked, you're stupid, that kind of stuff. And what I saw is even kids who were 5 or 6, could make good decisions, because they could make at least a good decision about themselves as their parents did. And I just, so I'm not, it's not like you don't say to a 5-year-old, you want to hold my hand or not when you're walking a busy street. There's some things you got to be willing to go to the mat about. But for the most part, you want to treat kids like they have a brain in their head and they want their life to work. And so the first point is simply that we want kids and teenagers, we have to insist, I want you to practice making decisions about your own life.
Yeah, a little bit. Bill made mention of, if you can read this, listen up and listen up good, because I'm only going to say this a million times. Bill made mention before the idea of imagine yourself to be a consultant, not a manager. And I've actually picked this up with the kids I work with doing test prep and say, look, so I work for you. Okay? I know a lot about these tests. I know stuff you haven't figured out yet. But it's my job to help you. And so I'm going to give you homework, and if it's too much, you let me know, and we'll figure out how to give you just targeted stuff, or if you can do more, let me know. I'll discuss this with your parents, because of course they're paying the bills. But I'm not going to grade you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what I suggest. And you can take it from there. One of the challenges, and I'll come back here for a moment, one of the challenges I think when we talk about this idea of giving kids more autonomy, is people like, so again, I should just let my kid, do everything and go across the street by himself and really do things that put him in peril or put his future in peril. And we're not advocating that at all, because there's nobody who knows more about your kids, loves them, understands them, has an idea of the future than you do as parents. But I suspect that you've had the feeling at least once or twice that maybe your kids aren't taking the advice, embracing it the way you'd hope they would. They kind of roll their eyes at you, like, whatever, Dad. And my feeling has been, and my experience has been in my household, just like my son said, the more you tell me, the less I want to do it. And what I want to do with all the wisdom that I think I have is have him take very seriously the advice that I have for him. And so it's trying to strike a posture as a consultant, saying, look, pal, I've gone through high school, and I've gone through college, and I've had some things go really badly in my own life, and this is how I've worked through them, so that I am at least one of the voices of wisdom in his life, and then he'll think very seriously about the advice that I have to share with him. Now, part of that, for me, is being what we talk about as a non-anxious presence. And the challenge is, if you sort of build on Bill's idea of, if I care more about my son's success than he does, I'm also going to have the inclination to catastrophize more than he will, in part because I look further down the road than he does. And the challenge is, that tends to really put me in a position that I'm less powerful and I'm less effective than I would like to be. Two reasons. One, we would like home to be less stressful than the world, right? If things go poorly, if things, if you have a bad grade, a bad performance, a fight with a boyfriend or girlfriend, something really, gnarly with a relationship, we sure want our kids to come home and talk to us and not talk to everyone else, from their friends to their coach, and not talk to us. And part of that has to do with, to steal a line from Ken Ginsberg, who writes a lot on resiliency, do we catastrophize? So I had a student years ago, do we catastrophize? When things go poorly, to go, oh my word, and sort of blow up. So I had a student years ago, went to a public school in Montgomery County, really good student, and she was trying very hard to get national merit on the PSAT, which, as you know, is kind of hard to do. It was going to be a stretch for her. It would take a really good day. And I was sort of 50-50 in whether I thought she could do it, but of course, voice great confidence, of course you can do this. Now, you might get unlucky and make a silly mistake, but run hard, work hard at this. This is your goal, and let's see if we can make this happen. So at her school, they take it on a Wednesday, and Wednesday afternoon she rolled in and looked totally crestfallen. And so clearly it had not gone well that morning. And I asked her, what happened? I got stuck on this problem, I couldn't figure it out, and then I didn't get the last two problems, and so there's no way I got national merit. I'm so sorry, that's really tough. Oh, no. Then I called my mom, and so I called her on the phone as soon as I got her to lunch and said, Mom, I just blew it, I know I didn't get national merit, I'm so mad, I'm such a dope, I can't believe I goofed this up. And my mom said, after all the time and money we spent on this, how could you screw it up like this? Now, I know this mom. This is not who she was as a person. It was certainly not one of her finer moments. But she had her hopes pinned so much on what national merit would mean for her kid. And she could imagine like a ticker tape parade. She was going to go to Columbia, there was going to be a yacht and a family compound on a Caribbean island. And she had the whole thing worked out in her head, right? And now the girl was going to clearly work at McDonald's and end up homeless. And so she really blew it. And she really lost her cool. And if she were more of a non-anxious presence, what we'd all imagine ourselves to do, I'm so sorry. I know you worked really hard on that, right? And I lose my cool like anybody else does, right? But I think if we have that idea of really working to be non-anxious, so if you find yourself really constantly feeling like you need to bark at your kid, or you're chronically sleep deprived or inarticulate, you really want to think about what you're doing in that way. Did anyone see the movie The Green Mile? Do you remember this one? So the guy who sucked in all the cancer. So I feel like that's a big part of my job, that I work with great families, but they tend on average to be a little stressed because this process of going through college is novel and unpredictable and threat to self and ego. So they get a little stressed. And part of my job is to listen to mom and dad and to listen to the kid and whatever they have to gripe about, and sort of take that on so that they can kind of clear their heads and think more clearly. And I'd like to think that it's even more important to do that as a parent, because if it's probably been a while for most of us since we were in high school or middle school, it can be a little stressful or a lot stressful. And if we can think of part of our job as parents just to take that in and say, let me carry that for you. Let me sort of peel some of that stress off of you, because I know you can do this. But I want to do that, and I sure as heck don't want my kid to feel that I'm so stressed out, that I'm so inclined to catastrophize, that when something that is really hard and is kind of gnarly, that he's so worried about that I'll be more upset about his not great grade than he will, that he chooses not to share that with me, because then there's no chance really whatsoever that I'm going to even get the opportunity to play consultant to him for some of the more important things in his life.
the way I summarize this idea about supporting kids in making decisions is basically talk through the pros, even young kids, talk through the pros and cons. Say, let's make a list of the reasons to do this, the reasons not to do it, and we're going to go with your decision unless it's crazy. And literally, that it's so hard to know what's in a kid's best interest. I mean, I tell this story that this woman called me maybe 10 years ago, and she said, well, you tested my kids some years before that. And she said, and she was telling me she had a question for me about something. In the course of our conversation, she tells this story about how her kid and like 20 other kids from his independent school were suspended from school for 3 days because they brought drugs or alcohol to a school function. While this boy in question was serving his suspension, his father, who was a physician, had a heart attack. And the boy knew CPR and revived his father, called 911, and saved his father's life. And the father then had spent a couple days in the National Rehab Hospital because he had some transient memory problems. So the family had to cancel their family vacation on the beach in Indonesia the week the major tsunami hit. These 20 boys have been asking themselves for the last probably 15 years, was it a good thing or a bad thing that we took drugs and alcohol to the school function? Now, we know a lot about what alcohol and drugs do to the developing brain, and I'm not saying this is nothing about that this is a good thing. It's just it's hard to know. In your own life, you think about how many times it happens, it's something that feels like a disaster, and it opens some door. Probably the most painful thing that ever happened in my life, not that, that's probably not true anymore, but sort of that time, was when I flunked out of graduate school for not turning in any assignments for 2 straight quarters. And that was
It's a cold, cruel world, Bill.
when I work with underachievers now, I tell them, I say, top that. and I got myself, I was really nervous in the last couple of years of college, and so I got myself into the top doctoral program in English literature at the University of California, Berkeley. But I was just so anxious, and I felt a lot of my colleagues were from Ivy League schools, and I from guys from the University of Washington, and felt stereotype threat, you know, and so I couldn't function very well, and I was too anxious to turn stuff in, so I didn't turn stuff in. And when I flunked out, actually, there are a couple people in Berkeley who said to me during that time, "You're the most nervous person I've ever met in my life." And one of them luckily said, if there's anybody on this planet that needs to learn to meditate, it's you. And so after I flunked out, I did, and I went home and I learned to meditate. And within 2 months, I could actually sit and focus for an hour at a time as opposed to 8 minutes, and my foot stopped tapping unrelentingly, and this facial tic I developed went away, and I could actually think clearly. I thought, maybe I could do something else. And a year later, I look back at flunking out of graduate school as the best possible thing that could have happened. No way I should have been an English professor. But I think with kids, it's the same thing. There's so often something painful that happens to them. And we think, oh my God, this is a disaster. We want to rush in and try to solve it, and do this, do that. When often, these are the greatest opportunities for kids than they are for us. And I did this exercise. There's a school in DC that really liked this idea of being a non-anxious presence and wanted me to do a couple programs with the parents in the school about how do you do it? How do you be a non-anxious presence for your kids? And the idea that, you know, if you got a baby who's crying, it's a lot easier to soothe them if you aren't really anxious yourself. Or if your kid comes home and you just got beat up, it's a lot easier to help your kid figure out what's the right thing to do if you don't freak out yourself. And so they like this idea of being a non-anxious presence. And we did this exercise with the family educator. And so we make up these scenarios, like a kid coming home having flunked a test, or a girl got excluded from her peer group, or something like that. And the first question we asked was, whose problem is it? And for many parents, it's very difficult not to jump in and treat it like this is my problem to solve. In my opinion, we weaken kids when we do that, and we treat them disrespectfully. Again, my premise is that they got a brain in their head, they walk out to work, and I want to start with that assumption. And occasionally, there are kids who are so depressed, or that they're abusing drugs, or they're self-cutting and self-burning, where we have to intervene. We have to put them into a program. We have to intervene in some ways. Short of that, kids don't make crazy decisions for the most part. And I think that in terms of decreasing stress within a family and within a kid, that supporting this is really a useful thing. And part of this, true, is helping kids figure out what's important to you, what you truly want. And when I was 23 and flunked out of graduate school, I thought I wanted to be an English professor. And there's a lot of people who thought that was a good thing for me. And they didn't know, and I didn't know. Basically, that's for me to figure out. And it started to occur to me that I got a call from one of my best friends. Her boy, when he was a freshman in college, he had a girlfriend who was treating him in kind of a verbally abusive way. And his mom was beside herself. We had dinner one night, and she's saying, "Well, I think I need to do this." And he wanted to figure out how to turn him against the girl. And I just said, I just think that it's obviously it's out of love that you're talking about this, but I think it's disrespectful to him to suggest that somehow his mom has to solve this problem for him. And I said, why don't you communicate to him that if you need me to help, I'll do anything I can to help you, but I have confidence that you can figure this out. And she says, I have confidence you can figure this out. If you need me, let me know. And he broke up with this girl within 2 weeks. It's really quite dramatic. And because I talk about this, think about it all the time, he's got dozens and dozens of stories like that. We want kids to figure out what do they need to do to make their life work? How do they want their life to work? What's important to them? And I think about what's the message if we say, okay, you're doing it this way, Buster. What's the message that we give kids by saying, you need to do this even though you don't want to do it? Part of the message is that you aren't capable of making good decisions. Don't trust yourself, listen to me. There's one way to be successful in this world, and I know what it is, and you don't. And stuff like that. And I think about how stressful it is for parents. I see parents who are fighting with their kids constantly about stuff. How stressful is that? And I think about how wise the Serenity Prayer is. Basically, what's the Serenity Prayer? Yeah. So that you change the stuff you can't change and accept the stuff you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference. And in many ways, it applies to parenting in an extremely powerful way. And so the next thing is this idea of encouraging kids to rest and de-stress. Here's the great irony. You can't make yourself fall asleep, right? You have to give up control to fall asleep. And yet when you wake up, what you experience is a dramatically increased sense of control over your own life. Because with a well-rested brain, the brain spontaneously starts to compute more information and put things in perspective. Now, the phrase is, it'll look better in the morning. It does look better in the morning if you sleep well, because your brain can put things in perspective. And I've been practicing since these two people told me I was the most nervous person they've ever met, and I should learn to meditate. I've been meditating for 40 years. And the kind of meditation that I do, transcendental meditation, it doesn't work if you try to control it. You don't try to control your mind. If you try to force thoughts out of your mind, it doesn't work. You have to just let it, you just think your mantra and just let it go where it goes. And when you're done, you have this dramatically increased sense of control. That, oh, I see the perspective. I know what to do now. That the research on it suggests you have a significant increase in internal sense of control, even though there's no control involved. And I've been struck by this irony of how sleeping, daydreaming, meditation, things where you just apparently aren't doing anything, but because they're so good for the brain. They increase the sense of control. And have you heard of the brain's default mode network? It's one of the really important things in neuroscience in the last 15 years. There's a brain network that only activates when your brain's offline, when you aren't focused on something. And so, like if you're sitting waiting for this lecture to start, and you don't have anything to read, you don't have a phone. What do you think about? you think about yourself. You think about your life. You think about your past and your future. How am I going to solve this problem? And it turns out that this activation of the default network in the brain is extremely important for developing this coherent sense of self. There's a lot of concern about kids who are wired 24/7 now, not having any mental downtime, not having time where they're bored and they just kind of have to reflect on their own life. And so this idea, we want to encourage kids to have enough unplugged time by themselves and enough private time with us. And certainly one of the wisest things that I could suggest to parents is spend time alone with your kids. It's harder if you have 6 kids than if you have one, but try to find, what I used to do with my own kids, I just read this when my kids were little, is I want an hour a week with each of you, just the 2 of us, because I want to make sure that we feel like we know each other, and that's how you feel like you know each other, spend time alone. And I think it's a great message to kids. There's nothing more important to me. I'm not going to answer the phone. I'm not going to look at my phone. I'm not going to take any messages. I'll do nothing, but I want to be with you. And even if my kids were teenagers, they'd argue about who would have it first, which is more about the teenage stuff than it was. But it's a cool thing. So we want this unplugged time and time in nature. Kids increasingly, for a sense of control, I want them to be in nature. That technology dramatically rips apart your sense of control, in part because it makes you more tired and stressed.
So I mean, so a lot of the families that I work with have the idea, or they've given the message to their kids that
Really, the only way to be successful in life is to go to an Ivy League college.
it's not.
Which is a lovely idea, except it's just not true. You guys have heard of Warren Buffett. You know who Warren Buffett is, right? So do you know where he graduated from? Nebraska. Do you know where he transferred from?
Penn.
Wharton. Yep, Penn. It's good to have a plan B, right? It worked out okay for him. So I do all this work with kids who are constantly, I want this SAT score, I want to go to Brown, I need to, whatever it happens to be. And the way that I talked to them said, of course, set your sights on that and work really hard for that, but let's have, what are other schools that are just like Brown? So that if it doesn't come together, we have a great other avenue for you. Because this is, again, Sonia Lupian who did the nuts. Simply the idea of having a plan B, having an escape route, having some other way that you can get there is enormously relaxing to brains. Because if you have the only idea, I must, but I can't, it's sort of a course of desperation. Bruce Feiler has great research, and one of the things that he talks about is how helpful it is to kids to talk about kind of the ups and downs that we as parents have had, but also not just us, also grandparents, right? And see, because kids see, all of us as, super people, right? I mean, we're all amazing at everything that we do, right? In part because we're good at our jobs, we're great as parents. We have a few things that we're really good at, and the things that we're lousy at, we don't do anymore, right? So to throw in a really geeky word, right? It's like parthenogenic, right? Athena popped fully formed from the forehead of Zeus. And so our kids have no idea, they haven't watched us struggle and get to where we are. And so to tell stories, not just about our success, but also the things that were kind of difficult is really helpful. My grandfather went to the same college that I went to, brilliant man. When he graduated college, it's important, he weighed about 125 pounds, he was a runner, and he was a chemistry major. So as a brilliant chemistry major at 125 pounds, he got the job that one would naturally get with those particular skill set. He worked as a prison guard. Because in 1931, that was the only job that he could get, because it was, you probably know, it was a bad job market that year. And so he bopped around that for a while, and eventually ended up, he formed a company, a chemical company, and did it for 65 years until my grandmother said, "You're 90, you have to stop." And he sold his company, he enjoyed every minute of it. But it was pretty rocky. And I think for the majority of us, there have been times, it hasn't been smooth sailing, it hasn't always looked easy. And I don't feel I need to share all the trials and tribulations of my life at this particular moment. But I really wouldn't trade them away, because they've gotten me to where I am. And in my experience, I'm also very confident in the work that I do. because having gone through some really, really terrible things as an adolescent, my father was an alcoholic who drank himself to death, and my mother had mental illness, so it was a little rocky. But having gone through that, I had great confidence that I can navigate most things, because like, how bad can it be, really? I mean, apart from something really terrible happening to my kid, how bad can it be? And so to Bill's point, we want to have our kids be able to handle adversity, make messes, and be able to clean it up, right? Because that's how they develop that confidence of going out in the world. But I think it also helps a little bit if we talk about our own messes and not just show the best sides of ourselves, because then it gives them a model that it's okay. Me too. I've done that as well, right? Because that's just a much more accurate model of the world. What else? So we always talk a lot longer, and then people always have fantastically great questions that we have not anticipated. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to hear what kind of questions people have. Thank you. So, enjoy our kids very quick.
Bill, I hesitate to ask this question, but I'm going to. You say follow your passion for a child is an important message, and I know that from my own life. My child's passion is going down into these little video games and staying there for hours. And I have a real hard time imagining that's a positive thing.
Well,
But it is his passion.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, I started lecturing about kind of what technology does to kids' brains probably close to 10 years ago. And at that time, there's very limited research. There's one of the first studies that was done on the effects of video games in the brain. Basically, it was very alarmist in the sense that there wasn't much activation of the frontal cortex, and the idea is kids, when we play these games, it will be completely impulsive. So I was lecturing about this stuff, and I had a guy working in my office who had three degrees from Tufts, and he said, "You're being way too hard on these games." He said, everybody plays them, they're great. Most people play them setting reasonable limits on them. And the research over the last several years suggests that there's a lot of positive things to video games. And I think that, but there are many kids in this world who can't set limits on them. They tend to be kids who have minds that are not the most flexible minds in the world, tend to have some difficulty with self-regulation. And I think that we can't make them. I mean, once they're 15 or 16, it's hard to police them. What I say is tell your kid, I can't send you to college until I can see that you can regulate your use of video games. With young kids, I think as parents we have to set limits on it. And what we want to do is we want to do it as respectful a way as possible. And we want to say that as a parent, I don't feel like I can responsibly let you play 6 hours a day, whatever it is. And I feel like I'm being a bad parent if I let you play more than whatever it is. But I want to work this out in a way that seems fair to you. So I used to say, set a limit on an hour a day or 45 minutes a day. And kids would say, well, it takes an hour and a half to get up to the next level. So the best advice that I've heard about video games, I'm old enough now. I'm old enough that one of my friends who's a couple of years older than me has a 5-year-old granddaughter, and who asked her, "Mom, Grandma, how old are you?" And she said 65, and the little girl said, "Starting from 1?" But my kids didn't deal with this so much. But the best advice I've heard is to play games with your kids. So is to treat it respectfully, and let them know that engage in collaborative problem solving with them. And there's a great, for kids who are not the most flexible in the world, there's a great website called Lives in the Balance. It's Ross Green's website, livesinthebalance.com. It's a big emphasis on collaborative problem solving. And one of the other things that drove me to the sense of control idea was Ross Green's work, his initial book, The Explosive Child. Some of you know this? Where he says, with the most difficult, resistant kids in the world, you can't show them who's boss. It just doesn't work. What you have to do is you have to say, I'm not going to try to use the force of my will to control you, because I know that once you get stressed, you can't think. You have kids who are rigid and resistant. And once they're stressed, you can say, well, if you get it together, I'm going to take you to Disney World. Or you can say, if you don't get it together, I'm going to nail you to the wall. And it doesn't matter because they can't think. And so this approach is, you sit down with, and you say, look, I don't want to, if I have to, I guess I'll pull this plug on the technology altogether, but I don't want to do that. Let's work this out in a way that I can feel like I'm being responsible as a parent, and you can still play this game enough to feel like that my life makes sense and my life is worthwhile. And to be really empathic about these games were designed to flood the brain with dopamine and have it be extremely pleasurable and have it be so immersive and so engaging you don't want to stop. I get that. I know there's a lot, tell your kid you know there's a lot of advantages cognitively to playing these games. Because the brain develops according to how it's used, that it seems to improve some aspects of visual attention. You can find things where you can say, I get this, and play games with them. And say also, I can't responsibly let you do this as long as I pay the bill, and you're my kid. And you negotiate. So let's try to do it this way. And if that doesn't, if he's playing too much, you do it again. You have a number of conversations with him. So I agree that for the most part, and I've seen a lot of kids now who have been obsessive game players. Who one is playing professionally. It's a different world, and another one is looking. He's not good enough to play professionally, but he thinks he can go in and learn how to do the play-by-play, right? Because these video game competitions have more people watching than the Super Bowl, and so it's a changing world. But I think this collaborative problem solving is a really brilliant thing to do. I didn't make it up. I mean, it's a brilliant thing to do with kids who have that tendency to hyper-focus on stuff and get overly engaged.
Really quick, the comment you made about choice and passion is fabulous, but I think a lot of kids, what's your recommendation for kids who choose something and they're passionate, and then when it gets difficult, they quit? I mean, my impulse is you have to push through the hard, and as a parent, isn't that our job? And their response is, well, I don't want to do it anymore. I mean, I think that's a...
Well,
I think trying to understand, again, to Bill's point, being empathetic, trying to understand why that is. So tell me more, why do you not want to do this? And one of the things that I think I see a lot with kids is they don't understand yet how a friend is better at this, right? And they're sort of stuck on the wrong side of Carol Dweck. They can see that Sally's she's just so naturally good at this, right? But what she may not know is that Sally's older brothers all played soccer, and she's been chasing them around for 4 years, and had 1,000 more hours of practice or whatever it happens to be. And so, kids, they don't know the practice that lies behind skills so often. They can just see that this person is good, and it feels bad if your son or daughter is not naturally as good. And so trying to understand kind of where they're at, and also what about this is hard. And what's the activity that your son or daughter wants to bail in, or just lots of things?
I think when it's a challenge, the impulses, it's too hard to practice.
Okay.
I think that, and I was coming over to a friend called me, oh, my daughter constantly quits. And I give her the choice, and I just think...
Well, I can say, so my daughter, and this is getting up in the book, so my daughter has been playing violin for a number of years. And my wife is a very, very good musician. And my daughter would play something. She said, well, that was great, but did you notice and this note was wrong, this note was other, and my daughter, I don't want to play anymore. I don't want to play anymore. There's a relationship guru named John Gottman. He's one of Malcolm Gladwell's first books, and he talks about relationships where if the relationship is positive enough, I can get away with being a surly son of a gun, and Bill's redness, Ned's just having a bad day, it's okay, right? But if the relationship hasn't sort of built up enough credit, if I'm a surly, then Ned is always like that, and he'll get really upset with me. Now, what Gottman found was,
in order to get to that place where you put enough credit in the bank that I can be kind of a jerk and have Bill take it in a more kind of empathetic way, the ratio of positive to negative comments, you're going to love this one, needs to be at least 5 to 1. 5 sort of validating comments for every 1 negative one. So as parents, I consider, no, I'm way more positive than I am negative. Totally, totally, absolutely, at least 3 to 1. And it's not enough. And so what my wife kept doing is critiquing. And so my daughter felt like she was constantly being criticized. She could never do it well enough. People who do work with coaching now with little kids, we all, as soccer parents sit there, what did you think about, and you do such and such? The people who are the best at this say to parents, before the age 12, there is 0 chance that your kid is going to understand any abstract concept about soccer. Don't even bother. Don't even bother. Just save your breath. And what you should do as a parent is sit there and say, it is so fun to watch you play, no matter how bad they are. Seriously. So my brother-in-law was a Div 1 college athlete, a great. And so he just wanted to push his kid and and he went to this coach's training and he said, it totally transformed my world. Because for 3 years, I was that dad. And I was pushing, I was pushing, I was that dad. And I went to this, and these people who've been doing this for 20 years said, you're wasting your breath. It won't make any difference. And he said the great part was 2 things. 1, I now go to these games, and it's so much fun. Because it's not my job to make him be a better soccer player. I just get to say, dude, that was great. And again, I go back to this idea that we want to give all that enthusiasm and outsource the technique and the criticism and everything else. There's a chance, and I don't mean to be hard, but there's a chance that you are just slightly more negative in your son or daughter's world in mind than you feel that you are. So it's just from my perspective, it's just something to watch, because there's a chance that she's gotten the message that you've seen. Oh, Sally's so good at this, and your daughter's thinking, I can't do that as well, and so I don't want to do it. And kids will keep looking from one activity to another to find something where they're naturally better than everybody else. And of course, we know that's not how the world works, right? The last thing, and Bill's made this point before, if we're back to our model of competency, control, and relatedness, and we realize that the reason your daughter's not doing, I'm assuming it's a daughter, if your daughter's not doing as well, so her skills aren't good enough, let somebody else do that. Find a high school junior, right, who will say the exact same thing that you say. Man, Susan is so cool, right? Because why? She's not, it's some teenager saying that same kind of thing. That's just been my experience when I see kids who run away. They feel criticized for some reason, even though we may not feel that we're doing that.
And I'll just add that when I work with kids and they tell me, that I tried baseball, but I gave that up, that I tried something else and gave that up. And what I say is that, would you like to be able to stick with stuff longer? I mean, I'm always at there, is that a problem? Is that something you'd like to change? Is that something you'd like to do different? And so I would suggest that you say, is quitting, is not being able to stick with stuff long, is that something you'd like to change? Because then that puts you in a position of power. I also think that it's perfectly within a parent's right to say, look, I paid for 10 lessons, and you got to go for 10 lessons. Now, you can't, ultimately, you couldn't enforce that. I mean, you literally couldn't drag her. But I think that you get that contract kind of idea. There's 10 lessons, and even if you don't want to do, I want you to stick with the 10 lessons. If you want to quit, you quit. And I'll tell you that my parents could tell I was pretty musical when I was a kid. And there's a children's show in Seattle, and this Norwegian guy, Stan Borson, played the accordion, and all I wanted to do is play the accordion. And my parents said, well, if you we have a piano, and if you take piano lessons and demonstrate you can practice enough, that we'll buy an accordion. Well, I didn't want to play it. I wanted to play the accordion. So I took piano lessons for a couple months. I just hated it. And I'm grateful 57 years later that they let me quit. And when like everybody else in my generation, when the Beatles came out, I was completely passionate about playing rock and roll. And all through high school, I did very minimal homework, turned everything late, but I spent hours every night dutifully working on music, teaching myself chord structure, practicing stuff, listening to things over and over and over again. And so my feeling is that I agree with everything you said, and I think that seeing, again, whose problem is it? It's your daughter's problem if she has trouble sticking with stuff. And we want to see, is this something you want to change? And if it is, if it's something like I start to feel, and as you said, what is it? Is I start to feel really stressed, like I'm not going to be able to do it well enough. And then you can kind of think with her, well, how can we work on this together? Does that make sense? So, anything else?
I think our evening has come to an end, so we'd like to thank both Bill and Ed for your wisdom.